It's 6 in the morning and the air smells like iron and earth, the way it always does out here after a cool night. There's a pickup truck parked along the gravel shoulder, a 1994 Ford F-150, faded red, one cracked taillight, the kind of truck that's been to the edge of the world and back. The engine ticks and at the far end of that field, right where the land flattens and meets the sky, there's a man. He's standing still. His name is Walter Greer. He's 79 years old. He's been awake since 3 in the morning, and he hasn't moved from that spot in almost an hour. People who know Walter will tell you he's not the kind of man who stands around doing nothing. His whole life, if he wasn't working, he was fixing something, building something, driving somewhere with a purpose. That's just who he was. But this morning is different. Because this morning, Walter Greer is about to do the one thing he's been running from for 50 years. And before this story is over, you're going to understand exactly why it took him this long and what it cost him to finally get here. Chapter 2A, Quiet Life in Meade. Kansas isn't the kind of place that makes the news. It's a town of about 1,500 people, sitting low in the southwestern corner of the state, where the land is so flat you can watch a thunderstorm roll in from 40 miles away and still have time to finish your coffee. Walter Greer has lived here for 31 years. He moved back after his wife Carol passed. That was 2009, and he's been in the same house on Elm Street ever since. A single-story white clapboard with a covered porch, a vegetable garden on the south side, and a workshop in the back where he spends most of his evenings. He's a retired mechanic. Worked at the same Chevy dealership for 20 years. Before that, he did 2 tours in Vietnam infantry, 1966 to 1968, came home quieter than he left, the way most of them did, and never talked about it unless someone asked. And even then, not much. He has one son, Danny, who lives in Wichita with his wife and 2 boys. They visit on holidays. Walter has a standing Sunday morning call with his oldest grandson, Tyler, who's 12 and already taller than his grandfather, and thinks Walter hung the moon because Walter once rebuilt a go-kart engine with him from scratch in a single afternoon. By all outward appearances, Walter Greer is a man at peace. He doesn't complain. He doesn't ask for help. He feeds the birds every morning from a coffee can on the porch rail. He reads Louis L'Amour paperbacks by lamplight, and every Friday night he plays cards with 3 other men his age at the VFW Hall on Route 9. But the men at the VFW Hall, the ones who've known Walter for decades, they'll tell you there's always been something behind his eyes. Something he keeps behind glass, like a photograph in a frame that nobody's allowed to touch. His friend, Roy Calhoun, who served in Korea and survived 2 strokes and still beats everyone at 7-card stud, once told him point blank, "Walter, whatever it is you're carrying, it's going to outlive you if you don't set it down." Walter just picked up his cards and said, "Let's play, Roy." That was 3 years ago. A lot can change in 3 years. Chapter 3, The Letter in the Coffee Tin. It started with a coffee tin. Not the kind you brew, the old kind, the big red Folgers cans from the 80s, the ones people use to store everything from fishing sinkers to emergency cash. Walter had one of those on the top shelf of his workshop, behind a box of drill bits and an old can of WD-40. He hadn't touched it in years, maybe longer. The night it all started, he was cleaning out the workshop. Danny had suggested it, gently, the way sons do when they're worried about their fathers, but don't want to say so directly, and Walter climbed up on the step stool and pulled the tin down. Inside was a folded letter. Not one letter. 3, all written in the same hand. A woman's handwriting, neat, looping, slightly tilted to the right, the way they taught it in school back then. Each one written on plain white paper that had gone the color of old bone. Each one still in its original envelope, addressed to a P.O. box in Dayton, Ohio. None of them had ever been sent. Walter sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't open them right away. He just sat there with his hands flat on the wood, staring at the envelopes, and he didn't move for a long time. He knew exactly who had written them. Her name was Margaret Ellison. Maggie, he'd met her in the summer of 1967 during a 2-week leave before his second tour. She was 22, worked the front counter at her father's hardware store in Chillicothe, Ohio. He was 23, a corporal in the 1st Cavalry Division, and in the 12 days that he fell in love with her the way young men fall in love when they know the world is uncertain fast and completely, and with a kind of desperation that can't quite be explained to anyone who hasn't been there. He told her he'd come back. He promised her. He didn't. Not because he died. Not because he was wounded badly enough to be sent. He came back from Vietnam in one piece, physically at least, in the spring of 1968, and he drove east from his parents' home in Kansas with every intention of going to Chillicothe. He got as far as Columbus. He stopped at a truck stop diner on Route 40, drank 4 cups of coffee, and sat in a booth by the window for 2 hours. And then he turned around and drove home. He never explained it to himself fully, not in the way you can explain things with clean words and straight lines. Something had broken in him over there, not in a dramatic way, not in a way anyone could see, but something had. And he was terrified, he told himself later, of bringing that broken thing into Maggie's life, of contaminating her with whatever it was he'd brought home in his chest. So he didn't go. He wrote 3 letters over the following months, trying to explain. He never sent them. She wrote to him twice. He knew that from a mutual friend, but he never responded. Eventually, she stopped. He heard years later through the same friend that she'd married a school teacher, had 2 kids, moved to a small town called Waverly, Ohio, a good life, a full life. He told himself that was enough to know. But it wasn't, because here he was, 50 years later, 79 years old, sitting alone in his kitchen at 10 at night, holding letters that had never been sent to a woman he'd promised himself he'd never trouble again. And all at once, maybe it was the hour, maybe it was the silence, maybe it was just that you reach a certain age where the weight of what you didn't do becomes heavier than the fear of what you might. Walter Greer made a decision. He was going to find Maggie Ellison, and he was going to apologize. Chapter 4, What 50 Years Does to a Regret. The first thing Walter did was call Danny. It was a Sunday morning, which was when they usually talked. Danny answered on the second ring, the way he always did, and Walter sat in his kitchen chair and just said it plainly. "There's a woman in Ohio I need to find. I owe her an apology. I'm going to..." The silence on the other end of the line lasted about 4 seconds. "Dad," Danny said finally, "how old are you again?" 79, and you want to drive to Ohio. It's about 14 hours. I know how far Ohio is, Dad. Danny wasn't angry. He was worried, and if Walter was honest, the worry was reasonable. He'd had a mild heart episode 2 years ago, nothing that required surgery, but enough to put him on a daily medication and earn him lectures from his doctor about stress and exertion. He had arthritis in both hands. He wore reading glasses now. He got up 3 times a night to use the bathroom. He was not, by any metric, a man built for a solo 14-hour road trip. "Let me think about it," he told Danny. He did not let Danny think about it. The next morning, he went to the public library and asked the young woman at the reference desk to help him find someone. Her name was Kelsey. She was maybe 25. Patient in the way that librarians have to be patient with older folks who aren't entirely sure how the internet works, and she helped him search for Margaret Ellison in Waverly, Ohio. Maggie was there, or at least a Margaret Ellison was listed in the Waverly Pike County property records. There was an address, a house on Cedar Street. Whether she still lived there, he didn't know. Whether she was even alive, he didn't know. That possibility, quiet, practical, terrible, settled over him like a second skin as he drove home. She would be 74 now. People died at 74. He knew that better than he spent 3 days going back and forth. He made a list. He was a lists man. Always had been, of reasons to go and reasons not to go. The reasons not to go filled most of the page. He was old. He was tired. She'd moved on. Her husband was probably still alive. Showing up at her door 50 years later was the kind of thing you saw in made-for-TV movies, not in real life. It was presumptuous. It was selfish. It was dredging up something she'd long since buried. But at the bottom of the page, under all of that, he wrote one thing: I promised her I'd come back. And under that, in smaller letters, as if he was ashamed to write it at full size, I want her to know it wasn't because she didn't matter. On Thursday morning, he threw a bag in the truck. Chapter 5, 14 hours, ANDA hard rain. He left before sunrise. That was his way, always had been. Get moving before the doubt wakes up. He filled his travel mug with black coffee, put the old road atlas on the passenger seat even though he had a GPS that Danny had set up for him on his phone, and he headed east on Highway 56 into the flat Kansas dark. The first few hours were easy. Open road, not much traffic, the sky going from black to gray to the pale orange of a Midwest morning. He had the radio on low, a country station out of Dodge City that faded to static somewhere around Garden City, and after that it was just the sound of the engine and the road and his own thoughts. He thought about Vietnam. He hadn't really thought about it in a long time. He'd done the therapy, back in the 90s, a Veterans Affairs program in Wichita that Carol had begged him to attend. He'd sat in a circle of other men and listened to things that made his jaw tight, and he'd talked some, and it had helped some. He wasn't haunted the way he'd been in the early years. But driving east, toward Ohio, toward Maggie, the memories came back in pieces. The heat, the particular silence after the noise. The feeling he'd had, coming home, that he was a version of himself he didn't fully recognize. That the boy who'd met Maggie Ellison in that hardware store was someone he'd left behind over there, and the man who drove toward Chillicothe had no right to go claim the promises that boy had made. He stopped outside of St. Louis for gas, and he sat at a picnic table outside the station and called Roy. "You already on the road?" Roy said. "Been driving 4 hours. You eat anything?" "I'm eating now." "Good." There was a pause. "Walter, she might not want to see you." "I know. She might be dead." "I know that too." "So why are you going?" Walter thought about that for a long moment. The trucks roared past on the interstate behind the station. A kid on a bicycle rode across the parking lot, slow and aimless. "Because I've been carrying this thing for 50 years, Walter said. "And I'm tired, Roy. I'm just real tired of carrying it." Roy was quiet. "All right," he said finally. "Call me when you get there." Walter got back in the truck and drove. The rain started, not a gentle rain, a hard, determined Midwestern rain that came in sideways and turned the highway into a long gray blur. He slowed to 55. His hands ached on the wheel, the arthritis announcing itself in both knuckles like a low-grade argument he couldn't win. He thought about pulling over. He thought about turning around. He thought about calling Danny and saying, "You were right. I'm an old man and this is crazy." He didn't pull over. He kept his eyes on the white line and drove through the rain. Chapter 6, the night at the Ohio border. He stopped for the night at a motel outside of Dayton. He hadn't planned to. He'd planned to push through, get to Waverly by 10 or 11 at night, sleep in the truck if he had to, knock on that door first thing in the morning. But somewhere on I-70, around Richmond, Indiana, his vision had started going soft at the edges, not double, nothing like that, just tired, deep in the bone tired, and he recognized that feeling and knew what it meant. His doctor had been very specific about that feeling. The motel was a budget inn, 22 years past its prime, but the room was clean, and the bed was flat, and there was a vending machine down the hall that sold peanut butter crackers. He couldn't sleep. He lay there in the dark, and the doubt came for him the way it always did in the small hours, not as a roar, but as a whisper, patient and thorough. Who did he think he was, showing up after 50 years? What was he hoping to accomplish? Did he actually believe that a woman in her mid-70s, who had built a full life without him, wanted to open her door to some old man from Kansas asking for forgiveness? He thought about her husband, the school teacher. Was he still alive? Would he open the door instead, this stranger, and look at Walter with the expression that said, "What exactly do you want with my wife?" And the worst thought, the one that sat at the bottom of everything, heavy as a stone. What if she doesn't remember? What if 12 days in 1967 were nothing to forgettable summer, and he'd driven 14 hours to drag something out of the past that she'd processed and released decades ago, without any help from him? He picked up his phone and looked at the text from Tyler, his 12-year-old grandson, sent around 9 o'clock. "Dad said you're going to Ohio. That's far. Are you okay, Grandpa?" Walter read it twice. 3 times, he wrote back, "I'm okay, bud, stopping for the night. We'll tell you all about it when I get home." He set the phone down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for a long time. At some point, he said out loud to no one in a motel room in Dayton, Ohio, "I promised her." And then he closed his eyes and slept. Chapter 7. The door on Cedar Street. He found Cedar Street with no trouble. It was the kind of street that existed in 10,000 American towns: modest houses, mature trees, cars parked in driveways, somebody's dog barking at something across the yard. The leaves on the maples were just starting to go orange at the edges. It smelled like cut grass, and he parked at the curb across the street from the house. Number 412. White clapboard siding, dark green shutters, a porch with 2 wooden chairs, and a clay pot of flowers, marigolds, orange and yellow. He sat in the truck. The GPS had gotten him here. The road atlas had gotten him here. 50 years of carrying something he couldn't put down, and now he sat across the street from a house in a town he'd never been to, and he could not make himself get out of the truck. He watched the house for 15 minutes. No movement. A car in the driveway, a silver Honda Civic, recent model, a small PB sticker on the back bumper. He noticed that. Maggie had always loved books. He remembered that. He remembered a lot of small things. He got out of the truck. The porch steps were 3 wooden steps, and they creaked under his weight. He stood at the door. There was a doorbell, one of those small lit ones, and a brass knocker that needed polishing. He knocked. He waited. He heard footsteps inside. Unhurried, a light tread. The door opened. She was smaller than he remembered. Of course she was. It had been 50 years, and memory always makes people larger than they are. Her hair was white now, cut short. She wore a blue cardigan over a floral blouse, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a book in her hand, a thick paperback, finger marking the page. She looked at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. And then Margaret Ellison said quietly, with something in her voice he couldn't quite read, "Walter Greer." Not a question, not a gasp, just his name, like she'd been keeping it somewhere safe. "Margaret," he said, "I'm sorry to come out of nowhere like this. I'm sorry it took me so long." She looked at him for a long moment. The book shifted in her hands. Then she pushed the door open wider and said, "Come in, Walter. I just made coffee." Chapter 8. Everything she never said. They sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Her husband, Harold, had died of a stroke 4 years earlier. 2 grown children, a daughter in Columbus, a son in Seattle. 6 grandchildren. She still volunteered at the library 3 mornings a week. She'd traveled to Ireland once with Harold, and that had been the great adventure of their life together. She'd had a good life, a real one. Walter told her that plainly. "I'm glad," he said. "I'm real glad you had that." Maggie looked at him steadily over the rim of her coffee cup. "Why are you here, Walter?" He reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and set the 3 letters on the table in front of her. The envelopes, yellowed and soft-edged, with her name on them in his own handwriting from 50 years ago. She didn't touch them right away. She just looked at them. "I wrote these to explain," he said. "I never sent them. I don't know if you want to read them. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But I carried them this whole time, and I need you to know the reason I didn't come back wasn't because you didn't matter. It was because you mattered too much. I was broken in ways I didn't know how to show somebody, and I was afraid of what I'd put on you." He paused. "That's a coward's reason. I know that. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I needed you to hear it from me, face to face. I owed you that. I owed you that 50 years ago." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, a cardinal landed on the garden fence. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "I want you to know that. A long time. It took me years to stop being angry. I know, I'm sorry." And then she said, "I stopped being angry and I just felt sorry for you, because I always knew, somehow, that it wasn't cruelty. It was fear. And that seemed worse to me in a way, that you were that afraid." Walter couldn't say anything to that. It was exactly right. "I did love you," Maggie said. Simply factually, the way she might say it had rained on a Tuesday. For what it was, 12 days and 2 letters and a promise I did. "And then I went on and I loved Harold for 41 years and I built a life and I'm at peace with it. But I wondered about you. I wondered if you were okay." She picked up the letters, looked at her name in his handwriting. "Were you?" she said. "Okay." Walter thought about Carol, about Danny, about Tyler and the go-kart engine, about the Friday night card games and Roy Calhoun's lectures and the birds in the coffee can on the porch. "Eventually," he said. "Eventually I was." She nodded, set the letters down, looked at him steadily. "Then that's enough," she said. "That's all I needed to know." Chapter 9, the graveyard on the hill. Before he left, Maggie asked him to do one thing. She'd kept in touch, over the years, with a woman named Helen, the mutual friend who had first told Maggie about Walter and later told Walter about Maggie. Helen had died in 2017. And there was someone buried in the cemetery on the hill above town, a man named Raymond Ellison, Maggie's father, who had owned the hardware store where they'd met. "He liked you," Maggie said. "He told me that after you left. He said that young soldier is a good man. I want him to know I think the same. I've thought the same, Walter, all this time." She gave him directions to the cemetery. She didn't come with him. She said this was his to do alone, and he understood that. He found the cemetery and it was the kind of place that had been tended for 130 years by people who understood that remembering the dead was a form of loving them. The grass was green and short. The stones ranged from worn colonial slate to polished granite, and the old oak trees filtered the afternoon light into something gold and shifting. He found Raymond Ellison's grave it was a modest gray stone, the dates confirming Raymond had lived to 81, a good long life. Walter stood there. He thought about that hardware store in the summer of 1967. The smell of machine oil and cedar. Maggie behind the counter with her hair pinned back. Her father in the back, visible through a doorway, doing inventory on a clipboard. The old man looking up, catching Walter's eye, and giving him a single slow nod, the kind of nod one man gives another that says, "I see you. I know what kind of man you are." Walter had spent 50 years wondering if he deserved that nod. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small American flag, the kind sold at the VFW hall, the cheap ones on the little sticks, the ones they put on veterans' graves on Memorial Day. He'd picked it up at the motel gift shop that morning, without fully knowing why. He pressed it into the earth beside Raymond Ellison's stone. He stood there for a while longer, with the wind in the oaks and the afternoon light going golden around him, and he felt something release in his chest that he'd been holding clenched, tight. Unexamined for so long, he'd stopped noticing the weight of it. It wasn't absolution. He wasn't naive enough to call it that. It was something quieter, something simpler. It was the feeling of a man who had finally, at 79 years old, done the thing he should have done at 23. Late, but not. Chapter 10. The drive home, he called Tyler from the road. His grandson picked up on the first ring, 12 years old and always near his phone, the way they all were now, and said, "Grandpa, you okay? Where are you?" "Driving home," Walter said. "Ohio. It's real pretty out here." "Did you find who you were looking for?" Walter watched the road for a moment. The sun was dropping behind the Indiana flat, painting everything in that particular late October amber that makes the heartland look like a painting. "I did," he said. "Was it good?" "Yeah," Walter said. "It was good." There was a pause, and then Tyler said, "Dad says you're a crazy old man for driving that far by yourself." Walter laughed a real laugh, full-throated, the kind he hadn't quite managed in a while. "Tell your dad he's probably right," he said. He stopped for dinner at a diner in Terre Haute, Indiana, a place called Shirley's, with a hand-lettered sign and vinyl booths and a waitress named Donna, who called him Han, and brought him a piece of apple pie without being asked. Because, she said, he looked like a man who'd done something good today, and good deeds deserve pie. He left her a $20 tip. He drove through the night, the radio cycling through country and classic rock, and a late-night AM station out of St. Louis playing Hank Williams, and somewhere around midnight, with the Kansas border still an hour away, he rolled the window down and let the cold, dark air fill the cab. He thought about Carol, and how she'd tried, gently, to ask him about the thing he was carrying, and how he'd always deflected, always said it was nothing, always redirected to something practical. He thought about how she had loved him anyway, through all of it, with a patience he hadn't entirely deserved. He thought about Raymond Ellison's nod in that hardware store doorway, and about Maggie saying, simply, "I wondered if you were." He thought about the 3 letters in an old coffee tin on the top shelf of the workshop, and how they could come down now, how he could finally burn them, or bury them, or just throw them away, because the words in them had finally been said out loud, and the debt they carried was settled. He pulled into his driveway on Elm Street at 1:47 in the morning. He sat in the truck for a minute, the engine ticking. The porch light was on. Danny must have driven down and turned it on. There was a casserole dish covered with foil on the porch rail with a sticky note on it. He read the note in the porch light. "We're proud of you, old man. Heat this to 350 for 25 minutes. Love, D." He stood on his porch in the dark for a while. The neighborhood was asleep. Somewhere down the block, a dog stirred and settled. The maples were still. He felt, for the first time in a very long time, light. Chapter 11. After he burned the letters on a Tuesday morning, in the metal fire barrel he kept in the backyard for burning brush. He didn't read them first. He'd written them. He knew what they said. He set them in the barrel and lit a match and watched them go. He felt no ceremony about it, no grief. Just the clean, practical satisfaction of finishing something. He told the story at cards the following Friday night. Not all of it, not the parts that belonged only to him and to Maggie, but enough. Roy Calhoun listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When Walter finished, Roy picked up his cards, studied them, and said, "You drove to Ohio, by yourself, at 79. 14 hours, Walter confirmed. Roy nodded slowly. "You dumb old fool." He said it with the kind of warmth that passes between men who have been honest with each other for years, and Walter heard it for exactly what it was. He sent Tyler a postcard from a gas station in Indiana. On the way home, one of those classic Americana ones with a cartoon cornstalk on it. On the back he wrote, "Some things are worth doing even when they're hard and even when they're late. Love, Grandpa." Tyler texted back 3 days later with a photo of the postcard pinned above his desk. He and Maggie exchanged 2 letters after that, real letters, on paper through the mail, the way people used to do. She told him about her garden. He told her about the go-kart engine. She sent him a photograph of her grandchildren, and he sent her one of his. Nothing romantic, nothing complicated, just 2 old people who had known each other briefly and honestly 50 years apart, acknowledging that the thread between them had never quite broken, it had just been left to hang. Sometimes that's all it takes. On the last Sunday morning in October, a few weeks after he came home, Walter Greer sat on his porch with his coffee and watched the light come up over Elm Street. The maples had gone full yellow, the way they did every year, and the air was cold in that particular clean way of a Kansas autumn that made everything seem like it was starting rather than ending. Chapter 12, The Only Thing That Lasts. There's something we don't talk about enough, the weight of the things we chose not to do. The words we didn't say. The doors we didn't knock on. The debts of the heart that we've been rolling over, year after year, telling ourselves that someday we'll settle them. Walter Greer spent 50 years carrying a 12-day love story, 3 unsent letters, and a promise he'd broken to a woman who deserved better. He didn't carry it dramatically, he didn't collapse under it, didn't drink it away, didn't let it ruin him. He just carried it, quietly, the way strong people carry things, the way Americans carry things, with their jaw set and their eyes forward and their hands on the wheel. But quiet carrying is still carrying. And at 79 years old, he put it down. Here's what Walter would tell you. If you sat across from him at that card table on a Friday night in Meade, Kansas, he'd say, "Some debts don't have a statute of limitations. The ones that matter, the ones that live in your chest, they don't expire just because time goes by. You either pay them or you carry them to the grave." And then he'd set down his cards and look at you and say the thing he told Tyler on the back of that postcard. Some things are worth doing even when they're hard, even when they're late. He turns and walks back toward the truck. He gets in. He drives home. If this story reminded you of something you've been meaning to do, or someone you've been meaning to call, tell us about it in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this one.